Purposeful Branding, and there's our recording, and EVP and Impact Global Lead of Novelli's Purpose Practice. So the book Purposeful Branding really presents, we're going to unpack all of it today, but presents a clear, practical blueprint for defining and communicating your brand's purpose, and more importantly, creating that alignment across your organization, which really allows to drive meaningful change. So Sandy herself is recognized as PR Week's most purposeful agency pro in 2021, as well as a Woman of Distinction in 2023. She also holds a board director position at Sustainable Brands and is an advisor to the Diversity Center. You've probably seen her face before because she is an experienced speaker on branding, messaging, sustainability topics. She works with clients across industries, Visa, Abercrombie & Fitch, eBay, Panasonic, and more. And she currently lives in Santa Cruz with her wife. I have had the incredible honor to work with Sandy over the years, not only at Porter Novelli, but also as part of the Sustainable Brands community. And she's truly one of the leading purpose thinkers and strategists in our business. So you can understand my excitement when I learned that she had put some of her wisdom down into writing in Purposeful Brands. I know you will enjoy today's conversation just as much as I will. So thank you for joining, and thank you in advance for your time, your energy, and your participation in this conversation. Finally, just to close our housekeeping, we will be recording the session. It has started recording now. We'll also be sharing this externally with our network. So just be mindful if you're asking questions or coming into comment of sharing sensitive information. We want this to be a really open dialogue because we are practitioners really looking to learn and share information, but don't disclose client names, individual names, any confidential details. We're going to open up the end of today's session for a full Q&A, but please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. That way I can start to cycle through and make sure that I'm calling you off mute so that you can ask your question to Sandy. Feel free to stay on camera. Please practice yes and communications and aim to listen and learn when others are sharing, just so that we can make sure that this is a super robust engagement for everyone. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation offline, just reach out to the Impact Relations team. Many of us are on the phone here today. If you want to give a quick wave if you're on camera, board and team, thank you. And with that, I think we're ready to turn it over to our conversation with Sandy. So thank you, Sandy, again for joining.
My pleasure. Good to be with you all. Yeah.
All right. We've got I hope you all are getting your copies of the book, Purposeful Brands. I was excited to get this in the mail. I felt like, you know, a kid on Christmas morning when I went down to get my package. So let's start with Sandy, why you felt compelled to write this book, and especially why now?
Well, I think when Kogan Page came to me and said, would you write a book on purpose and sustainability, you know, it was obvious to me and all of us in this field that there's a lot of confusion. What is purpose? What is sustainability? Is that the same as ESG? All these terms are conflated, and there is a bit of pushback coming, and it was even true when I started writing the book last year. But I've been doing this work now for almost 2 decades. Sustainability, Jedi, and purpose work for the last almost 2 decades. Prior to that, I was doing PR and communications and branding work. And what I learned over the last almost 20 years is, as a sustainability practitioner and working with technical, environmental, climate, Jedi practitioners who didn't understand the power of communications, that's what was missing, is this interlock between organizational change, which is what actual sustainability and purpose is, right? Changing the organization so it can deliver. And then the culture change required to actually accelerate the change. But I would say for me, I mean, it's a big project writing a book. I reached out to a couple of friends of mine who've written books and said, should I do it? And most of them said, a couple of them said, no, unless you're ready to take sort of all your thinking and your work and codify it into a theory of change. And actually the practice of writing did just that. It did exactly what my friend Mark Lee said it would, which is you codify and make sense in your own mind your theory of change and how you want to accelerate it. And I would say the main reason for writing the book and putting in it what I did, which is a lot of how-tos, and here's examples, and this is the whys, is because we've got to move fast. We are less than 7 years from 2030. We're not that far from 2050. We are watching our planet and the weather chaos create societal chaos. And I've always felt for the last 20 years that the power of business at scale to create positive change is where I want to work. NGOs, nonprofits, activists have an important part to play, as do governments and regulatory bodies. But business at scale, if we can all align and link arms in creating a thriving planet and an equitable society, we can have the world we want. So for me, it's like, let's move fast, people. Let's do better. Let's get everybody doing it. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree. You know, the power of business, the scale, the speed, the acumen. We need business thinkers. We need business solutions. We need business branding and marketing and comms platforms involved in creating this urgent change that we need. So I appreciate that context. And Sandy, I'm already going off of our prepared questions, but I'm interested, you know, codifying your theory of change. How has that impacted your client council, or has it? You know, spending the time to kind of think through it in detail, and then how's that working out in client council?
I think I've been doing this work now for close to 20 years in varying forms. And over time, what I've solidified is an approach and a perspective. So I'll start with, what is purpose?
Yeah.
The way I define it is a business strategy. It is not a campaign. It's not a mission statement. It is not a 3-year business strategy. It should be an enduring business strategy where you leverage all of the company's resource to deliver some greater good in the world through the business while creating business value. So if you are a computer manufacturer and you're making computers, what is it you expect those machines to do to make the world a better place? In what way? It's asking the why. Why are we making this thing? And one of the parts of the book where I talk about, if you're a new brand, and a lot of companies being born today come in with a sense of purpose, especially those who are tackling carbon capture and climate challenges and renewable energy and all of the sort of environmental innovation that's happening, you could say they're born with a purpose. But if you go back to the founder's story of almost any long-term, enduring, 100-year plus brand, you're going to find some hint at the greater good that the company was trying to create through the product it was making and innovating. And then by teasing that out, you begin to have a sense of responsibility of where you're willing to take some responsibility for the commons. Yeah. And that's, to me, that's what purpose is. What part of the commons? That's all those things we depend on, but none of us own: fresh air, clean water, thriving soil, a functioning society, art, health. Those are the commons. Which part of it are you going to take responsibility for as a business? And you're going to just orient all the procurement you make, all the people you employ, the profits, what's left over after the profits, like all of it. Just pick one thing and let's work on that slice of our front lawn and a little past that we're going to take care of and ensure we take responsibility for. That's purpose. It's a business strategy that leverages all the resources of a business in pursuit of a greater good.
Yeah, that's super clarifying. And I want to drill down a little bit on exactly what you're talking about, which is what is purpose versus what is a mission statement versus what's a vision statement. Because I feel like reading and absorbing all of the content that comes out. Harvard Business Review, I feel like every three months comes out with another article that's defining it again by a different perspective. What are your definitions to those three areas?
So for me, purpose is the greater good you're going to take responsibility for and create in the world alongside business value, like the business value. You're going to deliver profits, you're going to employ people well, all of that, but your purpose is the piece of either the environmental or the planetary ecosystems or the societal ecosystems that you're going to keep tackling in the best way that you can. That's your purpose. Your mission is the business itself, the way in which you're going to orient the business and the product or services you're delivering. That's your mission. To build the most cost-effective, fast-performing computing device might be your mission. Your vision is, what's the world going to look like when we do what we say we're going to do, which is when we leverage everything we're making in pursuit of driving value for our stakeholders and some greater good we're committed to in the world. This is the kind of world we'll be in. That's your vision. So, and then your values are the ways in which you're expecting mostly your employees, but certainly all of your stakeholders to show up, how you're expecting people to show up.
Yeah, that's super clarifying. It seems, we still get questions about, how each of these terms are different, but also how they can be complementary. And it's okay to have a mission, vision, purpose statement. Do you feel that organizations need all three or even four if you bundle in values, or, can they lead with just purpose? What's your take on that?
I think it depends on how you write it. I mean, I think in the book I use Procter & Gamble as a great example, because I think their purpose and their mission statements together are very clear about who they are as a business. Amazing products that delight consumers and take care of generations to come. If I'm remembering the way they wrote that, so I think it's possible. A great example is people talk about Patagonia as a purposeful brand, and it is, but it wasn't born that way. It was born out of climbers who wanted to make sure that they had the right equipment, but they did it from a place of the wild places that they wanted to enjoy. And that's why they've become such an environmentally focused, and I would say an almost activist around their environmental commitments, because that's the type of purpose they're signing up for and taking responsibility for. So there's ways that once you express your purpose, it should give you permission to say no to some things and yes to many other things.
Right. And that's something that you talk about in the book. And we'll round back to, I want to drill down on what you said earlier around the concept of the commons and, tackling your front lawn plus a little path. And I feel as though, and we'll talk about the anti-ESG, anti-woke movement a little bit more, but, do you feel as purpose practitioners today, I think 3 years ago, brands taking stands, we didn't have to be so apologetic in a way for why we were doing what we were doing. We were just doing it because it was, what we felt was right to do. Now I feel like I'm seeing this sentiment where businesses need to feel compelled to kind of draw that more directly to the bottom line, business success, business imperative. Is that something that you're seeing in your work more?
I mean, yes and no. I think there's a lot to answer there. Purpose is the word that we're using now to describe the greater good we want to create in the world as a business, right?
Yeah.
That could also be impact, positive impact. I mean, whatever. And you're right. Harvard writes about it all the time. And the words can be misconstrued. But if we say that's what purpose is, and then of course there's the sustainability strategy and then the ESG programs, like those things are three separate things. The pushback that's coming is being able to connect the dots between this greater good that you're creating in the world through the business and how it's driving business value. And I think that's a worthy case to make. The theory of change is when you get your purpose expressed right, when the thing that you're making and who you're making it for, who you're not leaving out, like the people you're including in who you're making it for, the people that you use, that you hire to make the thing, all of those are ethical questions, like about the business, that if you can tie them to a theory of positive impact or purpose or change, it should unlock innovation, creativity, value, brand value. And so actually that's what I'm working on now that the book is done, is how do we actually demonstrate and prove correlation? So I'm in the process of a pretty big project right now where we're looking across all of those. And that's the case we want to make, right? Intuitively, and we as purpose practitioners and impact practitioners understand this. We know employees feel more energized and engaged. We know brand reputation and sort of inoculation against pushback is there if people see our reputation as a responsible company. Like, we know all these things intuitively. I'm working on how do we actually prove it. And then I think you'll see that this idea that business can do more than simply deliver profit to shareholders, that's where we're headed. Now we're just trying to quantify it from a business discipline perspective.
Yeah, and I think that is helpful to combat some of these, extraneous claims that, purpose or addressing social or environmental issues is outside of, the business focus of making a profit. Actually, they all are one and the same. If you focus on addressing societal and environmental issues and governance issues, it will actually help, build business success, bottom line, all of the attributes that you just discussed. Yeah. So,
well, I mean, think about it. And then there's because what I try to do is track back, like, where did all this purpose stuff come from? And so one of the things that my research uncovered is if you go back to the era of the Jack Welch GE business strategy, he was seen as a renowned and successful CEO who's actually a bit of his reputation is tarnished. But he was the first CEO who saw his labor as a cost structure where a layoff could allow him to deliver a quarterly number. And so that was when the first time that CEOs looked at their labor pool and said, wow, if we just lay off 10% of our employee base, then we're going to hit our number for Wall Street and the share price goes up. All of a sudden, employees went from being a beloved, important, essential asset to a cost that could be dialed up and dialed down. And that sort of commitment and partnership between an employer and its employees was broken. And we're coming back to that now, right? We're coming
totally
back
there.
Coming back to it. So we saw a lot of management practices that were part of that generation of business strategy that said, if you deliver a profit to shareholders, everything else in society will get fixed. And the realization that, no, that's not true. We're going back to the earlier days of businesses, which is good corporate citizens, pay attention to your employees, make sure they're fed and housed and can afford the thing you're making. Thank you, Henry Ford, who understood that if he priced the Model T out of the realm of his own workers, who was going to buy the car? So that just type of community-based thinking, and it doesn't have to be nonprofit-like. It just means take it into consideration. Yeah. And that's what I mean by your front lawn. I was in a conversation with an environmental strategist, mostly out of climate regulation, and his line is proportionality. Like, we're not asking any company to clean up more than its front yard. Well, I think you should look a little past your front yard, but at a minimum, clean up your own front yard for sure.
100%. I feel like we're in an interesting point in our industry, and it will be interesting to kind of see which path some businesses take, and I like underlined and sticky note when you get the book, everyone write down page 33. This chart, which I'm sure you can't see, I found incredibly helpful. Sandy, I wanted to see if you could touch on purpose being at the center, but then the relationship between purpose, sustainability, and ESG,
Sure.
and how those terms work together.
So purpose sits at the top, right? It is the highest order. Again, it's the greater good you're going to create in the world through your business. Mission sits underneath that, but then sustainability is environmental, social, and economic. Remember that from its earliest days, sustainability always was under the premise that when we manage our environmental footprint, our inputs and outputs, when we manage our societal footprint, the impacts and outputs on society, including our workers, our suppliers, the communities we do work, etc., and we leverage that across the thing we're making, the economic outputs that we're hoping to achieve. It's the integration of those three things. That's a sustainability strategy. You're not going to tackle your carbon outputs and your carbon emissions to the absolute negative effect on your ability to generate a profit on your products. Those things have to be done in correlation and combination, right? It doesn't mean that you can't dial down the profitability or capitalize the cost of a carbon emissions project because you're going to see a reduction in carbon while simultaneously managing the cost structure over a long horizon of time instead of quarterly time. Like that's how you negotiate the economic, the environmental, and the social dimensionality of a business. That's sustainability strategy.
Yeah.
ESG, environment, social governance, is a term that Wall Street helped amplify. Why? Because they were watching companies that had a sustainability strategy begin to outperform the market. And like good Wall Street investor professionals, they wanted an algorithm that could help them predict which of the dimensions of environmental and social were actually helping drive greater economic performance. That's why all of a sudden this huge uproar about, well, we need it to be measured and we need it to be quantifiable. And if it isn't, then it's greenwashing. And I'm not suggesting that greenwashing isn't a challenge. It is. What I'm saying is don't get confused. What we can't do is allow the requirement for let's call it the essential practice of a balance sheet, which is a financial instrument that lets you assess the overall strength of a company. That's what an ESG program and ESG reporting should be. It's what is the metrics and programs with which we can sort of get predictive about your sustainability strategy, your environmental, social, and economic strategy, and then how are we going to measure it? How are we going to track it? And can we get it predictive? So in the same way that we've got these generally accepted accounting principles that have been around for 150 years, we're watching the birth of an environmental and social measurement system be codified and born and then integrated with financial.
Yeah. So what's your take, Sandy, on companies that are couching all of their impact work under the umbrella ESG?
I think we're going to watch ESG eventually fade to where it belongs, which is it's the language and it's the system with which we're going to track and measure year on year performance against environmental targets in much the same way that we have financial reporting that tells us how companies doing year on year and what the pressures are if they don't hit certain forecasts for growth or et cetera. Yep. We'll see that mature. ESG won't be I know some companies went from a sustainability department to an ESG department, and I think we'll come back to sustainability.
Yep. As we've seen many times, I think throughout this industry, we're at another pivotal point in our use of terminology.
That's right. But we're communicators, right? So it's our job to help make sense of it, which was a reason why I wrote the book too, is let's not let all this confusion about terms. Let's all use these terms this way And then we can get down to the business of actually operationalizing purpose through environmental, through social, through economic, through a sustainability strategy.
Totally. Yeah. 100% agree. Let's talk about anti-ESG though. It's part of our world, our roles right now, as much as we would like to ignore it. And I think, the reality is it is a small but vocal conversation. So, what's your take on the anti-ESG movement? But particularly, we saw legislation get signed in with Ron DeSantis in Florida this week on Tuesday. What are your feelings on anti-ESG? What can brands do to combat the narrative? Let's start there, I guess.
Okay. Well, I think we have to tease apart the two drivers, right? So there's for the anti-ESG that's more environmental is a reaction from states whose economy is pretty heavily dependent on oil and gas, fossil fuel companies, right? And so what they're watching is the portfolio or companies looking at portfolios and trying to identify environmental risks. I mean, prior to joining Porter Novelli, and even, now, how long has it been? It's been probably almost 10 years when I worked on some of the earliest divest invest campaigns, which was aimed at asking large philanthropies to look at their holdings. And especially if you were a climate philanthropy or a climate foundation, why were you holding oil and gas, right? So that it was a divest in that and invest in green technology. And that was probably a decade ago. And now you're starting to see that happen more and more, where big financial firms are looking at the risk of holding oil and gas when most of the assets will be stranded oil fields and gas fields that can't be cost effectively accessed. So all the financial calculations. So the pushback environmentally is from states who don't want to be who don't want their state economy affected by this move to begin looking at portfolios and questioning whether or not you're going to continue investing in oil and gas. That's one thing.
Yeah. What's
happening in Florida is a social, right? And that's, again, still part of this anti-ESG, anti-woke noise. And what I would say is you've got a group of activists who are leveraging political and corporate behavior actions for their own good. And a lot of the articles I've read on the current sort of anti-woke movement, look, first of all, the flash of negative reaction does not have long-term negative impacts for the most part, doesn't have long-term impact on brand sales, share price. It may for a short period, but over time, it doesn't, if the fundamentals are right. The second thing is, it doesn't matter what you do, if you're being used, your brand, your position, your program, your whatever it is, you're being used by an activist group for their own agenda. And that's going to happen. And I guess I would say to any company, and do say to companies when I'm talking to clients, is be prepared for any one of these to be a flash, to be used by this activist group. And that's just what's going to happen. So be ready for it. And let it play itself out. It's like the early days of social media when we would tell our clients trolls are going to be there. Don't ignore, don't engage.
Yeah.
That would be I do think I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the regulatory moves at the state level. I'm wondering what's going to happen to companies in where they choose to have operations, right? Will it be, Florida is different because Disney World is there, and that's a massive entity. But more and more, what will happen is these states become more and more activist in their anti-woke legislation.
Yeah. And we're starting to get some questions in, which is great. We'll turn to those in a second. And there's so much more to cover. But are you, we see Disney pushing back after being targeted, for a significant amount of time. Are you seeing, this concept of green hush? Do you have brands or individuals that you're speaking with that are like, oh, I'm going to tone down my comms because I just don't want to be targeted?
Well, right. I think we talk about that say-do gap, right? And in the early days of George Floyd and a lot of the impact and purpose work we all did, there was hey, don't be careful what you say if you can't, if a quick look under the hood shows operationally or programmatically as a company, you're missing some of the basics, that say-do gap. I think where we are is a bit of keep doing, and this is actually a lot of the clients I've counseled, whether it's economic headwinds or this anti-woke, anti-ESG, I've been asking everybody I talk with, what's happening to your budgets, what's happening to your programs, and by and large, the answer is it's full steam ahead.
Yeah.
We may have had to take a bit of a haircut on our budget for the coming year, but so did everybody else. So did marketing, so did hiring, all of it. It's like across the board, we might have kept our budgets flat or took them down by a point or two. We're just like everybody else, but nobody is dialing back capitalization and big programs. And the answer is we've made massive public commitments, and we won't get where we need to be in 2030 if we don't keep the program going. So from a sustainability, climate commitment perspective, I'm certainly seeing those programs continue. But I do think, and actually I would say, green hushing is not talking about anything and just saying we're not going to talk. Calibrating where you'll engage in someone else's conversation is smart. And that's smart communications. And that's what we're talking about. There's a conversation happening over here that you can just not engage in.
And knowing, the messaging, the terminology, the information that's best to share with individual stakeholders.
Right.
And, to your point on companies continuing to do the work, one of my global clients, they had a town hall and somebody asked them, are you going to turn away from these commitments because of the potential, economic headwinds? And the leader of that organization said, no, because it's core to our foundational business.
That's right.
We can't just that's not a nice to have, it's not a tack on, it's part of how we do business. And it's part of our strategy moving forward, and it won't be decoupled. So right. I think we're at the point in, the evolution of our industry that, these programs aren't tack on, they're very much foundational to how the organization works and how it will continue to work moving forward.
Right. Well, I think it's because companies have come to understand the climate is having an impact on the business and its risk profiles and its opportunity profiles. Right. And so is the society, the way society is changing, the changing expectations of employees, the changing expectations of customers, what, as the younger cohorts come into employment age and purchase age and start having families, like their expectations of products and the companies who make them is shifting.
Yeah.
And I think in this Sustainable Brands Conference in October, we heard from P&G's CFO, and he was very clear that delivering products that delight customers in a responsible way is their business. And for the CFO to be extremely clear that their financial strategy is inextricably tied to their environmental and social strategy, I was like, okay, that's that. Yeah. Well, please let every CFO become so enlightened.
Love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question about the book, and then I'm going to turn it over to the questions that we have in the chat, because you talked about the say-do gap. Mm-hmm. In the book, you dedicate a whole chapter to the say-do gap. I know that's a big part of Porter Novelli's platform. In the US, we're nearing the 3rd anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and a moment in time where many companies made commitments to supporting Black lives. Mm-hmm. You quoted the wonderful Conroy Boxill in your book, now, stakeholders are asking for receipts. Looking at where we are today, how many of those companies that you think made commitments do you feel are solidly following through on them? What grade would you give to corporate action over this past 3 years around this subject?
Specifically around DEI and justice, equity, diversity, inclusion efforts. I would give most corporations a C+, a B-. It's interesting. I was talking with one of our DEI advisors on the Sustainable Brands Advisory Board, and her perspective is what we saw was a huge push towards DEI commitments that became sort of a purpose articulation or a sustainability articulation. And then we saw the confusion of, well, who's actually responsible for it? Because we're reporting on it over here as part of our sustainability or ESG or CSR strategy. But actually, a lot of this sits over in HR. And yeah, we hired somebody, but there's some confusion about who's responsible, because it is HR. But it's also supply chain, and it's also, sort of marketing communications and respectful communications, inclusive communications. So it's a bigger and more complex an ecosystem to be able to drive progress in. And I think that's what we're seeing is companies coming up against the harsh realities of tackling inequity systems. And again, what 3 years ago told us was, what it made visible was systems of inequities that most of us hadn't seen before. These are centuries old. So it's hard work. And I think we've sort of bumped into the massive barriers that all of us as a society have to tackle. And you're starting to see some refinement of where that sits. It actually reminds me of 15 years ago in the early days of sustainability, where a lot of the work was around climate commitments, carbon, renewable energy, and there was some confusion. Does it sit in facilities? Does it sit in operations? Where does it sit? And, the predictions in our profession, some people were saying, eventually sustainability will be everybody's job, and you won't have these jobs. It'll just be baked in. And that's like saying finance will be everybody's job, and we won't ever need a CFO because everybody will just intuitively do it. I think we're a little bit there from a DEI perspective in terms of companies meeting their commitments. It's a little bit, whoa, this is bigger. Now we got to go back and we got to organize, because it is a diverse supply chain. It is ensuring psychological safety for all our workers. It is making sure that our marketing is inclusive and respectful. It is looking at our products, and are we leaving people out when we design these things? Are people with disabilities able to use our products? Like, we hadn't even thought about that. Then throw in the whole gender spectrum and it gets even more complicated. So I think that's where we are, honestly, is a bit of a pause where we've got to absorb what this is really going to take.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the crucial element is that companies continue to do the tough work. They continue to problem solve, and, they make sure that they're talking about it in the best way possible, so that from an outward perspective, it doesn't look like they've stopped.
I agree with that. I agree. I think this is where you don't want to be quiet. You do want to keep talking about the work and talk about the difficulty, how hard it is, right? Because it is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard this is massive system change.
Yeah. Great. Well, I know we only have about 15 minutes left. We've got some good questions in the chat. And Michael, thank you for sharing the Sloan MIT article, which is, I think, open actually in my tabs of articles to read from the week. So appreciate you sharing that with everyone. I'm going to ask some folks to come off mute and on camera to ask their questions directly to Sandy. I'll start with you, Melissa. Do you want to share your question if you're still here?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah.
I was looking for my mute button. Thanks, Sandy. This has been awesome. I first had a question about where to get the book. I was sharing an Amazon link with everyone, but I'm sure that that's not probably the best profitability for authors. So, like, what link do you recommend?
I recommend go to koganpage.com.
Okay.
That's a publisher, and you can get the book there.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So my actual question, you were talking about change theory at the start of this and a bit in the book. And I'm just curious if you use change theory in most or all of your client strategies and how they sort of respond to going through that exercise with you. Do they enjoy it? Do you just use it in the back of your head and apply it, or do they?
I use it in the back of my head and apply it. Change theory is a discipline that is not easily transferable to the business world, I would say. But it is useful when you're talking with sustainability practitioners or impact practitioners, and actually find there the language works, because it's and an example is when you're working with health and pharma companies, and they want to tackle a health equity challenge, that there you can talk about what is our theory of change, because it isn't just we're going to communicate that this is an inequitable situation. You actually want to try to dismantle some of the barriers that are preventing the delivery of health solutions to certain populations. And so then you want to have a question of, well, what is it we're trying to actually impact?
Right.
Is it health outcomes? Is it environmental outcomes? Using the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's social determinants of health. Like, what is it that we're tackling? And then that allows those who are looking to drive a certain impact to speak of it in that way.
Okay. Great.
Great. All right, I will pass it over to Amanda North. If you'd like to ask your question from the chat, if you're still on. She is.
Hey, she's muted. You're muted, Amanda.
We can see you, Amanda, but we can't hear you. You're
No.
muted.
There you go.
There you go.
Just saying, I miss you. I miss our conversation. So
I
it's been great to hear
know.
from you
It's good to
again. And
see
so
you.
many things you've said, and I look forward to reading your book, have touched on things I think about a lot. So back ending into my question, we're really talking about profound organizational change for companies in responding to the idea of purpose and sustainability, or maybe bringing that back to the fore in some ways. I'd be curious in your thoughts of how the role of the head of sustainability has changed. I mean, part of what I've seen, maybe you've seen this too, is it's gone from sort of a siloed operation and a team to really being pervasive as companies understand that it is about their core business. It's not about one group doing something that's a one-off. And along with that, I'm seeing a really interesting evolution of how boards work with management. And a lot of it goes back to my question about the time frame. Traditionally, management has been measured on short-term actions and their consequences as measured in financial results. Boards have been taking a longer view about the sustainability of the organization. And now they're realizing that they have to work more closely together. So it's really profoundly changing that relationship too. And I'm just curious what you've seen through your practice about some of, first of all, how managers are beginning to look at the more longer-term consequences of some of these sustainability issues. And how is that impacting what they do organizationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's massive organizational change, and the time horizons are different. But I was a guest speaker for a very large global multinational for their Earth Week kickoff. They make consumables, things we eat and beverages we drink. And what we were talking about was businesses are used to capitalizing innovation investment, right? Hey, we're going to create a new easy to open package, or we're going for the orange vanilla flavor that's on our innovation pipeline, right? So there is a system in business planning that allows for the integration of a capitalization of an innovation that is supposed to drive value and revenue. My challenge to them was, think about who your customers are going to be 10 years from now. These are the young Gen Z, Gen Alphas who have very different expectations about how they're going to interact with products. You need to be, what is a different way that people might enjoy the things you make in a different form factor? And that's the kind of innovation pipeline. So instead of this next year introducing the cherry vanilla flavor, why don't you think about a packaging that is less harmful to the environment and begin that innovation capitalization now? And so that then becomes part of everybody's job. You're absolutely right. We're working with a large global company that has, I think, about 100 different brands in it of food and snacks, et cetera. And it's all about driving their sustainability goals into 40,000 employees worldwide, because the head of sustainability, again, more strategic, less siloed. Now we're talking about change management. Everybody's job has to be different if we're going to get to these three most important goals. And your job may not directly require you to change what you're doing, but everybody needs to understand that as a company, in the same way we are oriented to profit and quality and safety, we're also now oriented to greenhouse gas reduction and a shift to regenerative ag. It's a mindset change. I mean, I've been around long enough to remember Six Sigma and the quality circles and all that. And for anyone who's been in business, especially at the board level, I try to remind them that's what we're talking. In the same way we created a quality culture that became pervasive, we're asking people to take an environmental and social dimensionality and make it pervasive.
Yeah, so a lot of it is about the internal communication, saying these are the things that everyone needs to have emblazoned on their forehead. And
that's right.
Everybody has a job that relates to this, whether you think you do or not. Decarbonization is part of what you do.
That's right.
And then another part is aligning the compensation structure.
100%.
So they're rewarding those kinds of behaviors. So
yep. It's true.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which we're starting to see more of, which is good. And thank you. Just want to thank everybody in the chat for sharing resources and links around ESG measurement. Appreciate everybody contributing. Brad, I think you asked a question if you're interested in coming off mute, which I'd love to get Sandy's take on.
Sure. Hey, Sandy, thank you again for this. This has been fantastic. It's on DE&I and specific. You know, we've seen over the years, maybe over the last 20 years, more and more organizations embrace the LGBTQ community and movement. We've seen benefits get focused, right? And we've seen ERGs get established. We've seen pride events and corporations going out. And yet there are countless anti-trans legislations going on all over the country right now. And I'm not seeing that same passion in organizations and brands stepping up to that. And I'm curious if maybe I'm missing some of this, if you've seen good examples, or if you think it's coming, or why there might be some hesitation.
I've been doing all gender trainings now for a couple of years with companies and have spent a lot of time looking at this emergence of how we define gender and identity and sex and biology. I have such a complex question, Brad, but let me keep it simple to the anti-trans legislation. I read an article, I think it was in the Washington Post, that was tracking strategists, specifically from the Republican Party, that were throwing, in their words, a lot of issues on the wall to see what stuck. And the trans issue is the issue that got the most traction. And so this became the issue, the wedge issue, that a lot of energy and was going to be used to create fear. Just last night, I was watching the documentary on Netflix, which I highly recommend, on Judy Blume and her writing as a novelist and all her books that are banned. And she was reminding us that's what's happening from a book banning and anti-trans legislation happened back in the 80s, almost identical. A lot of book bannings, et cetera. I think what we're seeing, and in the book I touch on it, is in order for us to solve the problems of our times, we need to move away from binary thinking, right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, to a sense of yes and, a sense of a continuum, a sense of this gray area in the middle. And we're watching this young generation come of age and say, you know what, these rigid gender roles of what it means to be a man and it means to be a woman, they don't feel right to me. So I'm neither, I'm both, etc. I'm beginning to play around with that as an identity. And all these things are happening simultaneously. You know, my background, my educational background is sociology and anthropology. So I'm always looking at things from the lens of what's happening in terms of group behavior, group beliefs, group systems. And I've just seen this emergence of, you know, as a queer person myself, who's pretty comfortable with this sort of identity, a fluid identity of both my masculine and feminine dimensions. I feel like that is a mindset that allows you to not get stuck in a particularly binary way of how things need to get done, because we can't reinvent everything, which is what has to happen. So the short answer to the anti-trans is I don't see companies responding in a way that I wish they would. And I think it's because the pervasiveness of these anti-trans bills are everywhere. It was one thing then when there was one bathroom bill in one state that a company like Salesforce or I think there was a sports event, or I can't remember now the specifics, but you know, people opted out of that state for that one law, and then the law was withdrawn. But now, because it's everywhere, how does any business push back against that? I mean, I understand the business complexities of that. Doesn't mean I like it. I don't. I do think we need companies to come out and take a stand. And the way they can is offering gender affirming care as a health benefit to their employee base. There's ways to fight against both what's happening from the access that women have to the autonomy of their own body. I mean, it's all the same, right? Gender affirming care, trans, the ability to express your own identity, to control your own bodily autonomy are all the same thing. And companies are going to have to take a hard look at how they're going to show up for their employees and their customers in the way in which they support them from a benefit perspective. But underneath it all, I see bubbling a new way of thinking that will enable us to solve the problems in front of us. And that's what I call yes and thinking, non-binary thinking. And once you pull yourself out of the rigidity of gender identity, you're amazed at what else you can see. It enables you to think differently.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Sandy. I think that's a good thought to wrap on. And if you haven't checked out, Sandy has also done a TEDx on the topic of yes and. So definitely check that out. So just to wrap up today's session, want to give a huge thank you to Sandy, not only for her time that she's given us today, but for the incredible roadmap that we can all take and learn from. So remember to grab your copy of the book. Thank you all for being active members of the Impact Relations Institute community. Melissa has dropped a note in the chat of our next Impact Council, so please do take a moment to check that out and register your interest. And then if there's other sessions that you'd like to see from our organization, please send us a note. We'll also be sending a survey post-event. We'd love to hear that, as well as anyone who's interested in becoming a more formal member of Impact Relations Institute and some of the work that we're doing. So thank you all for being part of this community. It's incredibly important that we as practitioners come together, we share, we learn, we build, and we support each other. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Sandy.
Thank you all. It was great being with you today. Thanks so much.
Sandy, that was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.